Hey, shalom, shalom, shalom. First and foremost, call halal Yahweh, Ba'ashem Yahushua, Ba'ashem Rakakwadash. Of course, double honors go out to the apostles and elders, great millstone, who continue through the Holy Spirit to be out there on the highways and byways to teach us His truth. This is Nama with the DC camp, and the article here is from the Atlantic, being this, what's remaining in this unholy so-called holiday that Esau has established called Thanksgiving. This is yet another video. It says a history not yet laid to rest. All right. And of course, trust me, there are those that wish this was put to the side and continue to be buried. This is, of course, highlighting another of Esau's crimes against the so-called indigenous peoples of the Americas. All right. And what we're talking about today is these boarding schools, these ways of trying to uh, turn the tribes of Gad into pseudo Edomites, all right, because they considered them savages and beneath them being these so-called white people. It says St. Mary's Catholic, this picture here, it says St. Mary's Catholic Indian Boarding School on the Bad River Reservation in Wisconsin circa 1925. So this history is very recent, all right? Don't think, hey, there's still people alive from this era, all right? Mary Annette Pember is a citizen of the Red Cliff Ojibwe tribe and a national correspondent for Indian Country Today. North America's indigenous peoples carry a painful past. This truth was laid bare when the mass graves of hundreds of Native children who died while attending residential schools were discovered in Canada this summer. All right? Something else they did not want to get out. But the times that we're in, these things are coming to light. This is by way of the Most High. This is time for this man to go down. Um, Throughout the 19th and 20th centuries, thousands of Native children in the United States and Canada were forced into assimilationist boarding schools that sought to strip them of their culture and heritage. Many died from disease, starvation, or physical abuse. Most were buried hastily, sometimes 2 or 3 small bodies to a grave. Outside the Native community, their deaths have been lost to obscurity, a painful chapter in a long ago history, willfully forgotten. Did you catch that? Willfully forgotten. But try as they might, non-native people cannot dodge the past. Indigenous people on both sides of what native people call the medicine line, that's the border between the U.S. and Canada, have been reckoning with the residential school's traumatic repercussions for generations. They lie underneath our collective psyche, waiting to be unearthed. This history will continue to resurface until our governments, institutions, and non-native people fully reckon with it. Interrogating and researching the history of Indian boarding schools has been my life's work, both personally and professionally. My mother, Bernice, was a boarding school survivor. In the 1930s and 40s, she attended St. Mary's Catholic Indian Boarding School on the Bad River Ojibwe Reservation in Wisconsin, where her family lived. I described part of her story for The Atlantic in 2019 upon the 200th anniversary of the 1819 Civilization Fund Act, which ushered in the era of assimilationist policies, which in turn led to the beginning of the Indian boarding school era in 1860. Let's look that up. Let's see if I can catch that. All right. Whoops. What the hell's going on there? All right. All right. The Civilization Fund Act was an act passed by the United States Congress on March 3, 1819. The act encouraged activities of benevolent societies in providing education for Native Americans and authorized an annuity to stimulate the civilization process. The fuck out of here. Got the nerve to call somebody uncivilized, therefore set up something to civilize them. Like I say, this devil got a lot to answer for. Alright. It says the first federal Indian boarding school was founded in 1879 by Richard Pratt, an American Army lieutenant who coined the phrase, "Kill the Indian, save the man." Many Native families were threatened with loss of food rations if they failed to turn their children over to boarding school authorities. Which brings up, by the way, for those of you still ignorant to who you're dealing with, this is going to apply to this day and age. What do you think they're going to do if you don't get that shot? Can't you already see that stores, what do you think behind this, all these ships off the coast of LA that can't offload their goods? Because this was always planned. They want you to get that fucking shot, and that shit is fucking people up. We kept trying to tell you, stupid motherfuckers, but you believe in this so-called white man. You've made him your god. All right, and they've made this shot, they've made it an idol. Everybody, this is exposing the faithless pieces of shit, all right, around the world. That's all it is. You profess that you know, well, who the white man set up to be God. All right, that's his God. Especially the so-called black woman. Boy, sweet Jesus. I can't wait till she gets hers too. All right, 'cause she's gonna go right down with her king, her real love interest, the so-called white man. All right. That's, this is who you're dealing with. That's why the scripture says in Ecclesiastes 1:9, there's no new thing under the sun. All right. This devil is going to do the same thing. What's the best way to get to a person? Cut that food off. Cut that water off. The Romans did it to us in Masada, 70 AD. All right. It's the same thing. All right. Goes on to say by 1926, more than 80% of school-aged Indian children were enrolled in boarding schools. 80%, damn. And at program's peak, there were approximately 400 such schools in 29 states. All right. It says Pratt's American model inspired Nicholas Flood Davin, a Canadian member of Parliament who was tasked with finding a means to educate that country's indigenous peoples. He shared Pratt's belief that Native people and their customs were shameful and inferior, and used the American schools as a blueprint for the Canadian residential school system. Although 2/3 of Indian boarding schools in the U.S. were operated by the federal government, 3/4 of residential schools in Canada were operated by Christian missionaries. Which received direct funding from the Canadian government for this work. Oh boy. So you can just imagine how this was setting up. All right, like what could go wrong? Continuing on for decades. Well, let me get this scripture real quick. Wow. Yeah, they hoped this wouldn't come out, Of course. Oh, I'm sorry. Got the wrong one. Hold on. This is Luke chapter 8, verse 17. It says, "For nothing is secret that shall not be made manifest, neither anything hid that shall not be known and come abroad." All right? Wow. Like the apostles have often stated, the truth is like a buoy. All right? You can only keep it down, suppress it for so long, then it's going to bob back up to the surface. All right? It says, but many native people resisted assimilation, stubbornly maintaining their ways. We still tell the boarding school stories from one generation to the next, sometimes in whispers, for fear of retribution from the institutions that operated the schools as well as from our own communities. Many survivors have faced denial and accusations that they are lying or simply seeking money when they've come forward about abuses suffered at the schools. Wow, go figure. That's why, hey, plenty of scriptures on this devil, you know. Uh, the only ones that suffer are them, and therefore they're the only ones that are due reparations or recompense. All right. He says, but without truth and justice, moving on is nearly impossible. By the time my mother entered St. Mary's at age 5, boarding schools had been around for nearly a century. She called it the sister school in reference to the nuns who ran it and lived there for about 10 years with her 4 siblings. My grandma Sally, also a boarding school survivor, had fled into Idaho after my grandpa Joe beat her nearly to death. Joe was often incapacitated by alcoholism, and the extended family was unable to care for the children, so they ended up at the sister school. Although Joe was unable to financially support his children, he still cared for them, often visiting them at the sister school and bringing them traditional Ojibwe foods. According to my mother, the sisters oversaw his visits to ensure that nothing Indian passed between them. Ain't that some shit? But Indianness was passed along all the same. Joe made traditional maple sugar cakes that bore his desperate, tenacious love and the memory of all things Ojibwe. The core belief that we are a part of rather than apart from the earth, my mother savored their sweetness her entire life, closing her eyes and smiling each time she told me the story. This remarkable connection to culture helped my mother survive a horrifically traumatic childhood long before healthcare professionals identified the dangerous impact of unresolved trauma on our bodies and minds. In the late 1990s, Maria Yellowhorse Braveheart, an associate professor in the University of New Mexico's psychiatry department, and Lamira DeBrine, a medical anthropologist at the CDC, began publishing their research about the effect of historical trauma on Native Americans. According to their studies, unresolved grief and trauma from the boarding school experience, in addition to massive loss of culture and lands, contribute to high rates of physical and mental health problems among Native people compared with all other ethnic and racial groups. In their quest to dominate North America, settlers created waves of policies and practices that impoverished our bodies and spirits and very nearly wiped us out. Does that sound familiar? See, we're all one peoples, and people have to understand that these are a result of the curses placed upon us as a nation. 12 tribes, one nation, all right? Continuing on, it says, but boarding schools in the U.S. and residential schools in Canada, with their emphasis on children, were among some of the most devastating engines of these policies. The schools created generations of traumatized children who grew into adults with little experience in parenting and loads of unresolved grief and trauma. This could be talking about the Southern Kingdom, all right? It says many people medicated their pain with intoxicants or obscured it with rage, denial, and other destructive methods, which Esau, through his laws, managed to take advantage of, all right? It says, fortunately, as far as when Jake acts out, I'm talking about Jake, both Northern and Southern, all right, acts out because of these things, what? You end up in the system, all right, and then he profits from it, all right? So it's this endless cycle. That's why the Lord has to come back and break up this system, this wicked system. It's not only America, but it's worldwide. It's Edomite/white supremacy. This thing has to be, that's this beast system, all right? It has to be broken down. All right, it says, fortunately, St. Mary's was located on our reservation, so my mother was able to maintain a measure of connection to her family as well as to Ojibwe culture and language. That connection, however, was forever tainted by the nuns' continual negative messaging about the inferiority of all things native. The cult of lesbians, the fucking nuns. As an adult, she suffered from what I believe was unacknowledged mental illness, likely advanced by untreated post-traumatic stress disorder. Hypervigilant, defensive, and unable to express affection, she was not well equipped to parent my siblings and me. Her shame and fear over being, as the nuns described her, a dirty Indian, lingered for her entire life. And see, that's the thing that these devils, all right, they really don't want to address, because they say, oh, slavery happened so long ago, but and this is done on purpose, they don't want to acknowledge the mental effects, all right, not to mention spiritual, but the mental aspects, like it says here, unacknowledged mental illness likely advanced by untreated post-traumatic stress disorder. All right. So many of us are wounded in this. That's why we act out in such ways. And this devil, like I said, has learned to exploit that. There's no coincidence that the music the way it is, all right, we know that this rap culture was invented by the CIA, all right, and our people, they don't believe these things, and that's what leads to them, their unbelief actually contributes to what's going on, all right, because they're still in this, the white man is not this evil type of mind, state of mind, all right, not realizing that they've been working against us from the time first, even before we were brought over here. They don't understand the conflict between the descendants of Jacob and the descendants of Esau, the so-called white man. All right. Oh boy. Anyway, continuing on, it says, but learning her true story and researching and investigating the school's history, as well as the impact of unresolved trauma on our minds and bodies, helped me gain context for understanding her exasperating and often cruel ways. At last, I forgave her and grew to admire her courage and stubborn resilience. She gave us a gift she could never have hoped for as a child. She stayed. In 2007, Canada took its first steps toward facing its assimilationist past by passing the Indian Residential Settlement Agreement, in which the government apologized and made financial reparations to all residential school survivors. 2 years later, the Canadian government launched a Truth and Reconciliation Commission focused on gathering survivor stories and opening up school records to ensure that this terrible period is never forgotten. As part of the settlement agreement, the government also provided funds for tribes to begin searching for the graves of children long rumored to be buried at former school sites. The work began this year, leading to the discoveries this summer. Wow. But like I say, there's always an ulterior motive with these devils. All right, let's get going to Job. All right. This is Job chapter 20, verse 10. It says, his children shall seek to please the poor, and his hands shall restore their goods. But see, what's done cannot be undone. You're seeking to... The whole point of this devil's actions, all right, he never intended, first of all, for this to be readdressed. Second, he has no intention of restoring. In fact, he can't restore what he's already taken. That's my point, all right? It says his bones are full of the sin of his youth. These things are a remembrance of the things that he has done, the crimes that he has committed. These things are going to be with him always, which shall lie down with him in the dust, all right, just like I said. Though wickedness be sweet in his mouth, though he hide it under his tongue, though he spare it and forsake it not, but keep it still within his mouth, all right, yet his meat in his bowels is turned. It is the gall of asp within him, poison. 15, he hath swallowed down riches, and he shall vomit them up again. The Most High shall cast them out of his belly. Last I checked, vomiting is a violent act. All right, but this even more so had to be emphasized because we got some idiots out there. Zephaniah 3, whoops, and 8 is a commandment. We can't do this ourselves. This is Zephaniah 3 and 8. Therefore wait ye upon me, saith the Most High Yahweh, until the day that I rise up to the prey. That blessing that was given to Esau, his descendants, Edom, all right, the sword, we can't deal with that. That's his mindset. That's why it was put in his mind to invent things like nuclear weapons. Everybody has to come to him. That's his blessing, to learn of his blessing. We can't compete with that. Ours is on the spiritual side. All right? So you go with your own old rusty 38 or AK or whatever you think. All right? You'll get a few, but that's suicide. It says, therefore wait ye upon me, saith the Most High, until the day that I rise up to pray. For my determination is to gather the nations, all right, that I may assemble the kingdoms to pour upon them mine indignation, which is what? Prophecy. There's nothing you can do to interrupt prophecy. It's going to happen. Things have to play out according to Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahweh Shai's, all right, will, not ours. What does Romans 13 say? All right, I'll get to that after I finish this. It says that I may assemble the kingdoms to pour upon them mine indignation, even all my fierce anger, for all the earth shall be devoured with the fire of my jealousies. All right, whatever's going to happen to this piece of shit so-called white man is already written. It's just being played out. This is Romans 13. And 1, it says, let every soul be subject unto the higher powers. For there is no power but of the Most High. The powers that be are ordained of the Most High. Meaning these kingdoms are set up by him. All right? And it goes on to say, verse 2, whosoever therefore resisteth the power, resisteth the ordinance of the Most High, and they that resist shall receive to themselves damnation. What happened to Judas Iscariot? He tried to force the Lord's hand. What happened? Nothing good is going to ever come of that. All right. Let's see. I'm going to scroll on down. You can read that. Of course, I'll post this in the description box. It goes on to mention the Catholic Church ran most of the Canadian schools, of course, and nobody likes bringing them to task. All right, they'll talk about everything else, especially with us, but these people have been raping boys for centuries. All right, this wicked institution called, the false prophet, the Catholic Church. All right, it says, but despite repealed calls from government and tribal leaders, it has never publicly apologized. The Canadian Conference of Catholic Bishops formally apologized in September. Catholic entities' financial obligation under Canada's settlement agreement was $79 million, including a target of fundraising $25 million for survivors. The church raised just $3.7 million. Wow. Wow. And Catholic orders that ran residential schools continue to withhold documents and other archival material despite repeated requests from indigenous and government leaders. Because they know, all right, they foul, all right, they know it. Let's see, in the U.S. has a similar story. The Catholic Church operated about 100 boarding schools, according to records from the Bureau of Catholic Indian Missions. In a 1908 decision, the Supreme Court ruled that Catholic missionaries could access Indian trust and treaty funds to pay for tuition at their schools. Wait a minute. Wow, ain't that some shit? I had to look at that again. It says, in an earlier investigation, I found that the church siphoned away millions of dollars from Indian tribes for tuition payments. The fuck? And as in Canada, Catholic leadership in the U.S. has been reluctant to help the public access any proprietary archival school records. What does that tell you? There's some wicked, wicked, wicked ass shit. And yet you'll have Jakes up here in this criminal organization they call the Catholic Church, all right, the Holy See, all right, worshiping white Jesus. Hey, that's why 2/3 of our people got to go, all right. Zechariah 13:8, all right. Not only are we living with the impacts of ethnic cleansing and genocide, but we are without resources to even begin to confront and do the healing. That's the point. That's the intent, all right? They don't want to restore us. Psalms 83, all right? All these peoples, throw organizations in there too, all right, are confederate against us, all right? And at verse 6, it gives you all our enemies, all right, with the so-called white man, Edom, being number one, all right? Let's see. Scroll down. Well, here's an interesting one. It says, skip down like halfway through this paragraph. It says 200 plus years of failing to provide guaranteed assistance to support infrastructure. Again, this could be just combine the two. We're talking about the same people, northern and southern. These strategies are the same. It says 200 plus years of failing to provide guaranteed assistance to support infrastructure, self-governance, housing, education, healthcare, and economic development has contributed to inequities in Indian country. Individual healing has many benefits, but without a healthy, stable society in which to live, it's simply not enough to create significant change for the entire community. The U.S. has a long history of ignoring its colonial past and epic failures to honor its treaty and trust agreements with indigenous peoples. Most people seemed genuinely shocked to learn that, as in Canada, the unmarked graves of thousands of Native children who perished at boarding schools might lie beneath their feet. But Native people have always known our calls for justice have gone unheeded for generations until now. Ignited by the Black Lives Matter movement, our country is facing a racial reckoning and experiencing a desire for reconciliation. The U.S. government, you have to underline this, appears to be starting the reconciliation process, all right? And I'm glad they brought this up. In June, Secretary of Interior Deb Haaland, the first Native person to serve in the role. Let's show you what these devils are doing, because people don't understand nationality like they think they do. Look what these slick pieces of shit did. You notice they say she's Native American, right? Well, let's see about that. You are what your father is, not what your mother is. This is Deb Haaland. Now, from the looks, you might agree. Let me get her picture here. See, you might, okay, yeah, she's Native American. Really? All right. Let's see. This, I mean, the underhanded shit that this devil does. I mean, wow. Let's see, early life and education. Haaland was born in Winslow, Arizona. She is an enrolled member of the Laguna Pueblo. All right, scrolling down, I want to get her mother, Mary Toya, a Native American woman, served in the United States Navy. Her father, Major Don David Dutch Haaland, a Norwegian Minnesotan, was an officer in the United States Marine Corps. So she's got her mother's phenotype, but she is of her father, so therefore she is not Native American. See, this devil is slick, or so he thinks. And this is how he gets shit over on our people, because our people, man, we got to get the fuck up out of here. Anyway, so for time's sake, I'm going to go ahead and just post this. You can read the rest of it. I've more than covered the point. This devil has a lot to pay for. That's why I'll close out with this scripture here. This is going to be James 2, you know where I'm going, and 13. For he shall have judgment without mercy that have showed no mercy, and mercy rejoiceth against judgment. Hey, so with that, shalom.